Okay, thanks for listening to the Aggie Out podcast. I'm going to record this basically while I'm driving up to the Utah State BYU game tonight. Posted as soon as I am done pretty much. But anyway, wanted to touch on a couple things, a few notes and tidbits, I guess, for only podcast listeners that I wanted to share with you. Shout it out on Twitter and talk to a few people. Kind of the hot topics right now outside of obviously a game tonight against BYU is definitely recruiting. A couple weekends here will be important. Official visit weekends. Check ustateaggies.com and the 24/7 sports database for any recruiting visits and news and commits and anything like that. That's the best place to find it. The really interesting thing about this recruiting class, I think, is it'll be interesting to see what kind of numbers the recruiting class will have. I think a pretty big need would be like a big need for next year is defensive line. Even though there's quite a few scholarship guys and a couple of transfers coming in, it'll be interesting to see how many new guys the Aggies sign to bring in both freshmen and JC guys. It might be a little bit like last year with the offensive line. They might be able to bring in a late signee or kind of wait and see what happens with some of these guys. There's some in-state guys. A couple are going on missions. The East guys, Seni Tuiaki and Paul Miley, they're going on missions. Johnson Hansen as well, forgot to mention him. So there's 3 East defensive linemen that the Aggies have a good chance with. More so Johnson Hansen and Seni Tuiaki, I think they have the best chance with Miley a little bit less likely to sign at Utah State. Those guys are really good players. They're just as good as some of the other guys that are signing other places, whether those or in-state guys, in general, if you're going to compare them. Not saying anything bad about any in-state guys necessarily, but a guy like Seni Tuiaki's a great player, would be a really good signee for the Aggies, and isn't really getting the attention that some of the other guys are. So another guy that's not a mission guy is Elijah Shelton. He's from Highland. He would be a really good signee as well. And then there are some out-of-state guys from California and a few guys that the Aggies are keeping an eye on, both JC guys and high school guys. But as I mentioned, I'll be watching, and it'll be, I guess it'd be pretty telling to see if they kind of recruit over guys, if they're planning on some of those defensive linemen leaving or anything like that. The other position, like I said, kind of only, I don't really want to tweet this or write an article necessarily, but kind of only for podcast listeners. Another position the Aggies need to upgrade is safety. The Aggies have offered a couple JC safeties, and it's not only, it's to replace Dallin Levitt, but it's also to get a guy that can play instead of Gage Ferguson, or kind of push that rotation back a little bit. The safety play of the Aggies was a little bit disappointing at times. I think Gaikowski is a guy that can play, and he's definitely going to be one of the starters. but they need somebody else, a little bit more speed back there than the Gage or Barron or somebody like that. So they're trying to sign a guy with a little bit more speed that can play there, the safety position. If they don't, or if they can't, they may even have to move like a cornerback or move some things around, do some different things. Obviously, they could play, Gage, but I like Gage as more of like the third safety, the third option. John Trell Rockmore hopefully will be back and better than ever as well. So he's another guy to add to that rotation. But it would be nice both in nickel packages and just overall talent and speed on defense. It'd be nice to have that. The other thing that I definitely wanted to touch on is the bowl scenarios for the Aggies. So Utah State has a few different things still up in the air. Obviously, with one of the biggest is going to be the New York Six or the New Year's Six picks and that kind of thing with the Big Ten and the playoff and all that kind of stuff. The Big Ten getting 3 teams in would help the Foster Farms Bowl come to the Mountain West and so forth. The other scenario is is who wins the Mountain West championship, because Boise probably wouldn't go to the Foster Farms Bowl if they lost. They'd probably go to like a bowl like Hawaii or Potato Bowl at home. And whereas if Fresno loses and Boise wins, obviously the winner goes to Vegas, and Fresno would go to Foster Farms. So a few different scenarios, a few different things still in the works, but all that being said, is the by far and away the most likely scenario has the Aggies going to the Arizona Bowl. And from the beginning, I've been happy with that option. I think the Arizona Bowl, because of the timing, because of the location, I think would give a lot of Aggie fans the excuse to drive south and go down to Tucson down there for a little bit of warm weather and for the bowl game between right around New Year's. So I think it works out almost perfectly for everything as far as that goes. The only downside of the Arizona Bowl is the payout. It's not the millions of dollars that some people get for going to bowl, but it's a 6-6 team in the Mountain West playing probably a 6-6 team from the Sun Belt, right? So it's not going to be a great payout. It's going to be a winnable game, and it's in a location that's actually a really good location. So that's all. Those are all good things to look forward to, in my opinion. Not a huge thing as far as recruiting or anything or payouts, but it's a good option for the fans, a good option for the players, and I think it would be a good fit for the Aggies this year. So that's kind of the bowl things. On the recruiting front as well, the Aggies have offered a lot of high school offensive linemen, and so a couple of their visits the next couple of weeks will be with offensive linemen. Next year, the Aggies are going to have at least 5, all their starters, or a lot of their starters, graduate. Anything could change as far as something could change as far as younger guys beating out older guys, or different things like happened this year. but there's going to be a couple guys graduate off the offensive line, and so that's going to be a position for the future as far as those offensive linemen. Offensive linemen very, very rarely come in and play right away, and so you're always building depth. You're always bringing in young guys to add to depth and add for the future, because it is a pretty hard position to recruit right away. The Aggies successfully recruited pretty well last year when they needed guys to come in and play right away, but that's not something you want to do on a regular basis. I think this year and next year we'll have a pretty good mix of young guys and old guys on the offensive line, so they'll be able to build for the future. Going through some of the positions, I think the Aggies would love to add a playmaker at running back. The Aggies, for all Lawan Hunt's ups and down, lovers and haters, whatever you want to call it, him graduating opens up a spot and playing time for somebody to come in and get a lot of carries, get a lot of touches, and make plays. So that's definitely a position of need for the Aggies to help a relatively new quarterback in Jordan Love next year, or Columbia, or whoever plays the quarterback. That's going to be an important spot to have a good running back, good offensive line to help that quarterback. So wide receiver will be a position kind of like defensive line. It'll kind of depend on how urgent the staff thinks they need somebody to come in and play, I guess, because there's quite a few guys. There's a lot of numbers, a lot of players at the wide receiver position. It's just a matter of finding somebody either young with a lot of potential to bring in and groom and to coach up to take over those positions at some point, or if they want to bring in somebody to try to play right away. I think Scarver showed that he can have the speed to make plays, and then Ronquavian Tarver will be back for another year, and so there's not necessarily a huge need right away, but it's going to be something that in the future, with guys graduating this year and next year, it's going to be a position that you've got to build up the bench, build up the depth, build up the talent that you've got in that group. The other position that the Aggies already have a commitment with Jason Thomas at cornerback, to try to replace Jalen Davis, along with the guys already at Utah State, kind of replacing. Hopefully he can at least replace a guy like Bailey, and maybe somebody else that's already there with experience can step in and play every down like Jalen Davis did and improve and that kind of thing. So those are the main positions. I don't think a lot of teams are super worried about obviously their quarterback recruits and that kind of thing, whereas the Aggies they've got a couple positions that they're not as worried about, that they can kind of shoot for the moon on, as far as offensive linemen, for example. And then there's a couple positions that they'd love to get somebody in right away, like defensive line, but there's not necessarily a ton of room. So it'll be fun to watch. Like I say, check the 24/7 Sports website with ustateaggies.com. Just type in ustateaggies.com, and that'll take you to the Utah State section of 24/7 Sports and get all your up-to-date recruiting news. So I guess I left I left the